know each other first, but I had just finished, I think I had just finished the manuscript of Play All Night, my book, Play All Night, Duane Allman, and the Journey to Fillmore East, when Allison and a group of students came to Nashville, and we spent a few weeks together exploring sites and talking. And she's shown me the book, and as any teacher could say, I'm very proud that she has marked the book up and made a whole bunch of comments in it and everything else. And she asked me to start a little bit about kind of why we're here, the Allman Brothers in general, and a little bit of an overview of the story. And assuming most of you know the band, the Allman Brothers Band are first ballot Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, 1995. They put out their first record in 1969, and for 3 years worked their way, I guess, from 69, 70, 71 to becoming one of the biggest bands around. They released a phenomenal record, recorded it at Fillmore East. That's the one record anybody will know from them just randomly. A record they recorded live at Filmore East in New York City. And 3 months after that, I guess, Duane Allman, the leader of the band, the founder, the spiritual force of it, was killed in a motorcycle accident. The band did one of the more remarkable things I can think of is they went on the road as a quintet, 5-piece, and played really through their pain. That's the best way I say it. Played through their grief. In 1972, recorded their second best-selling record and immediately in a row. That one, Eat a Peach, went to number 4. And at the end of that year, their bass player, Barry Oakley, was killed in a motorcycle accident within blocks of where Duane had been killed. It's a real Southern Gothic story. But the remarkable thing is that the band endured. And in 1973, they released a record called Brothers and Sisters, which was a number 1 hit. Ramblin' Man was their number 2 hit. And the group sort of endured for 45 years total. They broke up in 1976, reformed in 79, broke up in 82, reformed in 89, had many lineup changes, 89 through 2014, including parting ways with the founding member, Dickie Betts. A legacy of gold records, of millions of tickets sold, a whole bunch of people named Melissa or Jessica after their songs. And these songs that loom real large in a lot of people's imagination. Influential band beyond belief, continues to influence musicians and bands today. They get referenced all over the place. And my book is about the early era of that band. It's about the founding era, Duane Allman's founding of the band, Play All Night, and really through Barry Oakley's death in 1972, where that chapter of the band, what fans call the original era, closed, and things changed exponentially. Still a wonderful band, music that I still love, but a different entity altogether. I stopped at a certain point for a variety of reasons. Maybe we can get to some of those today. Some of my friends who are on this, who checked in, said they were here, will have heard these stories before too. So thanks all for being here.
So to start, we're going to talk about Duane Allman and the original era a lot tonight. And he's obviously a huge part of the Allman Brothers Band. But tell us some more about the other members and why their musical contributions and their sound are equally as important to the sound and the style of the ABB, and that it truly wasn't all about Duane.
Number one, absolutely wasn't all about Duane. And I think something super interesting about the name, the Allman Brothers Band, is the intention was it was kind of the brothers being the band, not being Duane and Greg Allman. Let me back up a little bit. Duane Allman is a hotshot lead guitarist who records in Muscle Shoals, records with several people, but he gets famous recording the Beatles' Hey Jude with Wilson Pickett. Duane gets a chance to start his own band, and the idea is really they're going to make him a solo star. Stevie Ray Vaughan. I don't know why I said that, because that's decades later. Jimi Hendrix is the model I'm thinking of. Jimi Hendrix had the power trio, the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Duane, I'm actually not burying lead here. I'm crunching a whole lot of material to say when Duane gets a chance to form his own band after recording with Wilson Pickett in October, November of 1968. He gets a contract in January-ish of 69 and gets a chance to form his own band. And he realizes he doesn't want to be a solo artist just doing his thing, that he really values music in tandem with others. Now, any musician can tell you, and any musician will tell you music is always greater than the sum of its parts, or should be. Like, that's in general the gist of it. But there are ways for a hotshot lead guitarist, or any hotshot, any person with supreme talent, to rise above the band and become the central focus of that. Duane didn't dig that. Now, his brother didn't mind it at first. That's a little tiff that they have just about in this founding era when they get started. But Duane didn't like it, and he didn't like the idea of anybody kind of standing ahead of other people in a musical sense. And this holds true throughout his life. He talks about it a lot. His friends reminisce about, more or less, how much he would talk about it. He didn't like flash and dash. So he has a chance to form this band. And he had met this bass player, Barry Oakley, through his other travels earlier in the year, and they'd really hit it off as kindred spirits. Like, we should get a band together, get all the best players we can, and just do the greatest thing you ever imagined. We're going to do this together. But Barry is in another band already with this guy, Dickie Betts, who is also an incredible lead guitarist, also from Florida, where Duane is from. They're all living in Jacksonville at this point. Dickie and Duane had crossed paths earlier over the years throughout Florida. Not always a cordial exchange that they had. They were two gunslingers, and that's how they squared off against each other, I guess, a little bit. But I think it was more Duane to Dickie, at least in rereading the quotes. In the meantime, Duane is in Muscle Shoals, and he's recording at Fame Studios. He's recording on all kinds of hits. And J. Johnny Johnson, who is a rhythm and blues drummer who'd been playing with Percy Sledge and Joe Tex, a whole bunch of folk, including Otis Redding. J-Mo comes from Macon and sets up camp with Duane. And J-Mo says, I was there because I was there to make money. He said, my mentor told me, you want to make money, go play with the white boys. So Duane went, and he said, J-Mo went to Muscle Shoals. He said the second he played with Duane, he forgot all about that, and it was all about the music. And then Barry would come. So they began to create something new. Now, the thing about Duane up to the point when he formed the Allman Brothers Band, is the music that he created was very rote and was not very original. He was a seasoned cover band artist. He wrote some decent arrangements, nothing as good as Hey Jude until he wrote Hey Jude, from my opinion. But he was using other people's arrangements, playing them on stage, doing very well, thriving as a live musician, but he didn't have an original sound. And he needed these other people to create this original sound. So I've got three. I've actually got four, because I've got Dickie in this picture too. Eventually, Duane quits Muscle Shoals and drives with J-Mo down to Jacksonville, where they set up in the house where Barry and Dickie's band, The Second Coming, is living and playing. That's in Jacksonville. It's got a historical marker in front of it. As far as I know, the first historical marker in the state of Florida for the Allman Brothers Band. And there's a picture of it in the book, actually. The Gray House, they called it. They show up. Eventually, they start jamming with Butch Trucks, who's another drummer from Florida, from the scene, who they had crossed paths with several years earlier. And they have two drummers, two guitarists, a bass player. And as Duane said, like, we knew the band was better than any of us as singers. And Greg Allman was still back in LA, Duane's brother. The final Allman brother is the other Allman brother, which is just kind of always interesting. He completes the puzzle. But the super, long story, a tiny bit longer. On March 23rd, 1969, they get together in this house in Jacksonville and have what they call the Jacksonville Jam, or a jam. And it is the original 5 Allman Brothers plus a guy named Reese Winans on keys. Reese ends up playing with, now he's playing with Joe Bonamassa, but he was playing with Stevie Ray Vaughan for a time as well. That day, they finally convinced Duane to call Greg. We really need you to get him home so we can finish this band. Greg shows up on March 26, 1969. They hand him the lyrics to a Muddy Waters song called Trouble No More that they had sped up. And I always call it Allmanified, added their Allman Brother magic. And really, if you want to say, like, to your question, Allison, like, what's the difference? Like, listen to, Muddy Waters, if you will, version of Trouble No More that they learned versus their version. And you'll hear, like, okay, all these people added this little element to this sound to make it bigger. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Each of those guys, I'll wrap this up real quick. Each of those guys had their own influences. Everything from JMO with jazz and rhythm and blues, all of them steeped in the blues. Butch Trucks loved classical and folk. Dickie Betts loved folk, and he loved country and string and bluegrass music. So they had this wide, and then they loved psychedelic music of the 60s. So they had this real wide repertoire, a melting pot that they put in and made this sound that was just different. And Allison, you could say, like, you could replace any one of those people and it would have been different. Yes, of course. That's, I'll get people on my Facebook that'll say, like, oh, it wasn't the same after Duane died. Well, duh. I mean, like, like, you take any member out of a team and it's different. That's just the way teams and humans work. So, there's a long answer to that question, but I think each of those players was unique, specific to how they contributed to the greater whole. And I could wax poetic and have for hours on these things,
So you're hinting at it here. We're kind of like getting to this point naturally, but why is At Fillmore East the definitive ABB album, at least, in the sense of the book? And sort of what kind of musical barriers and frontiers was that album breaking and pushing at the time, kind of considering the at that time current events?
Yeah, so that's such a great question. So whenever you have a book, you have to have a central thesis. And I'm talking to a former student of mine here, and we were just joking about this off camera before we got started with y'all. I had written a PhD dissertation on Duane Allman, a PhD dissertation for a history PhD. And then that just was a long document that just proved I could complete, like, this long PhD process, but I had to turn it into a book. And a friend helped, actually, Coloradoan, I don't know how, Coloradoan, but read the dissertation and said, you wrote a book on At Fillmore East. And then Bob had to sort of say, whoa, I don't understand. How did that come about? How can I define this sound that I think is the biggest in the universe, captured, on vinyl, on anything recorded, in like one album or one say-so? So I had to completely reimagine and think about, like, what albums were, because they're not the same anymore. Like in the 70s and all the way through really the 80s until CDs came out. I mean, I was an album guy, and they were these precious, every once in a while documents. And back in this early 70s, I mean, the Allman Brothers had 4, 5 albums out in 5 years, consecutive years, 6 and 7 years. I mean, now it takes artists, or it did for a long time, took them years, to put stuff out. Now people are speeding it up, but they were albums were these super precious documents that artists gave. They were the way. Well, there were 2 ways to make a living playing music. The best way was to sell singles, get hits on AM radio. Another became, and the Allman Brothers, they were a part of this in the album era, to sell albums, to put together really good pieces of art and put it together as a whole piece and sell it. And that's where the Allman Brothers were. For them, though, the problem was they had recorded 2 records going into this. 1969 is their debut record, self-titled, 1970s Idlewild South. And they released these records, and they did well enough. The second one did better than the third, but they really hadn't broken through. And the comments were all, and this is the real gist of the book when you get to these chapters, is the comments were all, Like, yeah, this is good and everything, but if you've seen them live, like this doesn't even touch it. Like they're so much better. So as the band is like recording these records and putting them out, they are absolute road dogs. They're on the road 300 days a year. They're playing 250 shows a year. They're playing anywhere they can find an outlet to plug in. Sometimes they'll show up on a Saturday or a Sunday, play in the afternoon until they get kicked out. And they're building their chops, but it is not something that gets captured well in a studio environment because they thrive on the audience reception. They thrive on it. What the audience gives back. It's the same thing as when you guys nod here. I have no other audience to go by, right? But when y'all nod or smile, I'm realizing I'm getting through, right? And it pushes a little bit. And that's the same thing audiences do for the Allman Brothers. So there was a lot at stake when they decided to record their third album live, fully live, in front of the biggest, most important stage in rock, which is Fillmore East in New York City. And so they made a really bold decision to do that. Then they made bolder decisions afterwards to make it a double album, to sell it as a single record price, and a few other things that enticed and pushed it into the marketplace. They played off a few things. They didn't, their record company. So, you know, in all honesty, I think you can call it the definitive album because, you know, when you're looking at when I'm looking at Duane Allman as an artist of the Allman Brothers Band, my questions were, what were they trying to do with music? How do we know that? And how do we know if they were successful? Well, we know what they were trying to do because they said it. And it's not just Duane, he sets the vision, but they all share this vision about music with improvisational intent, creativity, played virtuosically, or played by virtuosos, audience reception is important, etc. How do we know if they succeeded? Well, that's what the audience said in their reviews and in the primary sources that I referenced, right? So it's a definitive album for the reasons of, number one, it is the album that they put out when it was all on the line and said, this is how we want to be remembered. And they might not have been remembered had they not had succeeded with that, or remembered different, right? They would be maybe much more of a cult in the lowercase following, you know, underground, like, ooh, this major secret, instead of something folks know. The second is because it works, right? It's sold, and not only was it received very well, but it also sold very well, continued to, and is known very well as this definitive statement. So I guess, Allison, your question is a big one, right? But it's true. Like, how do you call it definitive? It's because you've got this kind of, you know, well, people saw it as definitive, they saw it as definitive, you know, like now it's part of canon. So, you know, I'm sharing it with, you know, my kids and, you know, other rock fans and that sort of thing. Now, the musical barriers, I'll do that's your second question here. So I'll just touch on it real quick. As quick as I can do with anything. This is a band that literally had all forms of American music in their fingers, right? They had blues, they had jazz, they had folk, they had country, they had string music, bluegrassy stuff. They loved, you know, they liked classical. They liked what the San Francisco bands, the Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead, and others were doing with their music, expanding, changing things, adding this kind of weird youth element to the maybe jazz aesthetic that they had, right? They added all this together into something that really is uniquely theirs. And now everybody will say my dissertation was like a new form of American music, but I never could name it. And it's not really Southern rock. I think this may be something we'll get to. And it's like a tiresome subject, but it's one that is worth discussing. Is it's bigger than that. It predates the explosion of Southern rock. So it's like this whole completely new thing. And people did sort of struggle to say, how do I define or describe this? I mean, everyone from, you know, the everyday people writing in college newspapers without a byline to, you know, Lester Bangs of Rolling Stone magazine, you know, like, I just don't know how to tell you what I'm hearing, but it's really awesome, you know? So they were just doing something new, and new takes a little while sometimes to catch up. There's a quote I have of Phil Walden, their manager, record company owner, hands in a lot of cookie jars, got in some trouble for that. But he said we were just afraid maybe this group was too musical, if they were just too good for the audience. So breaking musical barriers, long songs, many changes. I was listening to Elizabeth Reed today, a memory of Elizabeth Reed. I mean, that's like a classical piece. Listen to how it moves and flows with improvisation throughout. It's amazing.
A lot of the times when you talk about the Allman Brothers Band, the term Southern rock comes up, which you're right. The Allman Brothers Band technically kind of predates that thing. I would say probably more the definitive label for Southern rock goes to Lynyrd Skynyrd. But that label still applies. A lot of people describe the ABB as part of the Southern rock genre. So I guess, like, how do you reconcile that? Because that's a big label and there's a lot of stuff going on there.
So it exists. Listen, there's a million ways to do it, right? You can say, no, Allman Brothers aren't Southern rock. They're too good to be Southern rock. They invented it all. Everybody came after. Southern rock is derivative. It's this and that. Sure. Number two, absolutely, the Allman Brothers Band are Southern rock. Follow their lineage from 1969 through the creation of that genre. And then the third one is sort of like, well, they were Southern rock for part of the time, but they were bigger. And I kind of fall as any wishy-washy person in that third part, right? Number one, yes, they're Southern rock. You can't deny it, because that's how people know them. And we, look, I get a lot of times like on social media, like, well, Greg said it's rock, so all music's from the South, so it's rock. Well, yeah, he did say that. But Greg is not the definitive voice on what Southern rock is or isn't. And neither is Bob Beatty. Neither is Allison Willey. I mean, it's I know it when I see it, but they were definitely part of it and marketed as such. Now, it's interesting, super nuanced. You can go over to my blog, longlivetheabb.com, and I have this blog about the birthday of Southern rock, August 14, because that's the day the Allman Brothers' most Southern rock record, Brothers and Sisters, comes out. It's also the day Lynyrd Skynyrd's first record comes out. So it's like, okay. And it's interesting, in that post, I talk about the development of that term Southern rock. It's a marketing term. Artists don't like genre. I mean, I'm an artist. I fit beyond, and that's true. Like, I can be cynical about that, but like, no, an artist isn't going to like genre. Two, an artist doesn't determine genre as much as he or she might think that they could. They might think that they could. Three, what does it really matter anyway? It's just something for people to kind of argue about. Now, the issue, I think, with the Southern rock discussion, period, end of story, is its embrace of Confederate iconography, the rebel archetype. And that was an issue in the mid 70s, and it has continued for sure. It's gotten, sort of back. But in this era, I mean, the Allman Brothers, they had two black members from 1972 to 1976, J-Mo and his best friend growing up, Lamar Williams. And they had toured with rebel flag on posters, on merchandise, and they had a Robert E. Lee on the horseback. So, look, the way that I put it, first of all, they have all disavowed their association with that. And for them, I'll say this, in that era, with the success and everything that was going on, they were not signing off on their merchandise or anything like that. This was something going on in the back office. No, that's not an excuse, but it is the fact of life. But there is an embarrassment about that now. They were a very short window where they used it. Now, I'm a historian of the South. I'm a historian of Southern culture. I am a Southerner. I'm a descendant of both sides of the Civil War, but I am a little more connected, or maybe raised on the Southern side of that, where that flag was presented to us as a benign symbol of resistance. And so there's where I think, the issue really comes in now, where the Allman Brothers like, well, no, that's another issue. They couldn't be Southern rock because they did never use the flag, which is wrong. People select memory, or they had black guys in the band. So, the way I put it in the book, and Allison, I'll forever be kind of working on this language of the way to say it, right? But it is, you know, the fact that the flag could be used in this context. I mean, Tom Petty, as late as the 80s, used it in his Pack Up the Plantation album, right? And he also came back and said, I really should never have done that, blah, blah, blah. Was because of what we were taught, what Southerners were taught, including the Allman Brothers, who were all from the South, except one, that the flag represented exactly what Southern rock represented. F you to the man, F you to the Yankees, F you to the kind of people, F you to Neil Young for singing, Alabama and Southern Man. And so they don't like it because of the association with it. They don't like it because musicians don't like genre. None of it matters because they're Southern rock, just like the rest of these bands. Yeah, are they better than Molly Hatchet? Yes. Are they better than 38 Special? Yes. But they're still part of that, parcel to that thing. And it is Southern rock to me is a time and place. So a lot of people will be like, well, why is REM not Southern rock, right? Or the Drive-By Truckers. It ends, I always say it like sort of ended about the time of MTV because that ruined those types of hair band, the sort of grubby biker dude bands. Like just look them up you can see them. They all had videos. 38 Special, like you're like, yeah, they were not video friendly, faces.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna hop us back to Duane Allman again. So he kind of broke with convention at the time. Bands of that era typically had like a front man who represented the whole band, and everyone else was just the band. But he really stressed the Allman Brothers Band as a band, and he didn't want to be the front man or like the face. He wanted everyone to kind of share in the group because it was a group. He didn't like the individualism. And why, like, what is it about Duane that brought him to music with that perspective when everything else at the time was trying to pull out the individuals?
That I think in this particular case, like framing the question the way that you did, he didn't really have, well, I guess at this point he did have the option to step out and be that. The way that I, found that maybe interpreted it is, it seems like he just didn't want that responsibility. He just wanted to play guitar and run the band. Now, the thing is, I skipped this part a little bit, but Duane and Greg started out with, I'm wearing the shirt Almond Joy, which is their first band. This is the Georgia Allman Brothers Band Association. Shout out to GABA. When they left as right out of high school, Duane quit high school, Greg finished the next year, and they left as the Almond Joys. And they recorded some singles and eventually ended up in LA as a band called Hourglass. And Hourglass was I think Duane thought he was going to go out there and be the superstar hotshot guitarist leading his brother's band, and his brother's going to do his thing. And Hourglass saw Greg, who really is a super good looking guy with a great voice, and said, oh, that's our front man. So I think part of Duane's response to it was because that was a 2-year fight with the record company about that, pushing Duane back, pushing Greg forward, that Duane just he just hated. And he quit. He left LA more than once, finally left for good. And, I think this is the time of this is the counterculture, the hippie, the youth movement coming up. So this idea of sort of sitting around and, playing ensemble music. And JMO turned him on to jazz, and jazz is the ultimate ensemble playing and improvisationally ensemble playing, and ensemble playing, improvisational ensemble playing. And so you got that going too. Like that's an inspiration to him. You've got his bandmate, Barry Oakley, who's reinventing bass playing while he goes. And then he's, got the harmony guitar with Dickie Betts. So I think it's actually so funny we're having this conversation today, Allison, and this question came up because I just put this on my social media. It was, He's like, Dwayne's like, we did some sessions, and the only thing that came out of it was I just wanted to get more back into the group thing, and that was about his solo sessions in Muscle Shoals. So, um, you know, like imagine, right? You have a band of six instead of three. Now you're splitting your money six ways instead of three ways. Do you need a bigger crew or whatever else? So it's a unique thing to say, I am going to subsume my ego and create something bigger than me. And it's one of the things that attracts me to Duane Allman in a big way.
Yeah, absolutely. So while Duane said this is about the group, not about the individual, he's still very much the focal point of the band, even though he passed away pretty early on in the band's career. If you look at dates of kind of their classic or beginning era through sort of the end of what you consider sort of the original Allman Brothers band, he was not a part of that for many, many years because he unfortunately passed away. But what is it about Duane you think that propelled the band to such future success and still holds the public enthralled? I mean, here we are in 2024, still talking about the Allman Brothers band.
Yeah, I mean, the guy died. He died 53 years ago last month, right? Um, he was just becoming a household name when he died. He was known, he was well known, but not at the level that he became known, after At Fillmore East broke. Okay, so this is another one I've obviously thought a lot about. And, I wrote a book knowing what the end was going to be, essentially, right? Duane was going to die. Barry was going to die. I had to wrap it up and do something. So I was, but as you do that, like, well, what are the lessons here? What are the things that we're learning, right? And I think, one of the things about about Duane and about to answer your question about the endurance of the vision is it was a clear vision, and he assembled the right people together to do it and the right mindset to follow. And the four who lived, Greg, Dickie Betts, Butch Trucks, and JMO, carried that spirit with them as they continued to add new players and new things, and gave those new players, this is why they continue to endure, the opportunity to shine in their own way. I think a lot about these things like bands, like sports teams, and you do have to replace players sometimes, for whatever reason. Somebody gets traded, somebody leaves, whatever else. And, having that sort of through line about this is what we're trying to accomplish here. This is our vision. So he had a vision that was really big, and he assembled the right players around them. And I think he had, Butch Trucks in particular would talk about his messianic qualities. They'll talk about Barry Oakley being sort of like the John the Baptist of this situation, or I'm speaking in Christian terms here, but I don't mean to. But like more saying like you had the one who was the evangelist, and the other who was the one who was setting the whole tone. That's how they spoke about it. I'm actually speaking at a conference in Ireland later this month, in a couple of weeks, on spirituality, Southern Gothic imagery, and the Allman Brothers band. So look, I would say holding the public in thrall. There is no greater way to die than at 24 no more rock and roll way to die, really, than at 24 on a motorcycle when your band has just hit gold with the album you've been working for. So there's that element of roadside tragedy, or that you just have to look at the grotesque or whatever. It locked him in time too, right? So his output is super high. Like, we don't have an album of his and you're like, oh, I can't listen to that late period record. And I'm speaking to my hardcores when I say that. And he left a really good legacy. Like his daughter Galadriel put together a 7 CD box set a decade ago. Very little Allman Brothers on it. So like there's a lot of factors that combine, and I think he was an excellent guitarist. He was an excellent band leader and musician, and that has endured because he captured the zeitgeist enough, that he sold enough, that got enough attention, that he stays there. So his bandmates, I think fans demand it too. I can't pick us out of that one. We love this stuff. I mean, we it's important, and it's important for a lot of ways. Is why I like to study it, because it's just so interesting on myriad levels, you know.
A big part of the book, obviously, is talking about how Duane and the Allman Brothers band kind of broke the band mold, performing in this highly improvisational style. We talked a little bit about how jazz is, still to this day is something that's very ensemble and improv heavy as well. But why is that improv style, that ensemble style, so revolutionary at the time where the Allman Brothers Band was forming? And what's happening in the music industry in America and abroad that is making the Allman Brothers like such an industry change?
Yeah, and this is the Woodstock generation and the Woodstock era, right? So I'll start name dropping some bands that maybe we'll go over y'all's heads of it, but for some of us old heads out here, Cream, uh, Eric Clapton's band, Cream is really the one that I think one of the early ones. Led Zeppelin to a certain extent is another. We're playing music and just stretching it out. Fleetwood Mac with Peter Green. I'm right now referencing three British blues bands, by the way. That's not lost on me. The Brits are who sort of reintroduced the blues to the American public. So that's not who necessarily how Duane and Greg and the rest of the band heard the blues. They heard it on radio stations, WLAC out of Nashville. But the British have reintroduced this kind of new way to do it. So the idea of sort of playing guitar and jamming, playing loud, stretching things out. San Francisco, the Grateful Dead, Santana, I mentioned before, Jefferson Airplane, Quicksilver Messenger Service. These bands were all doing the same thing at varying degrees of success. Janis Joplin's backing band, Big Brother and the Holding Company, would jam. Even they would say they were not maybe worthy of the amount of time they were spending jamming. These were things that annoyed Bill Graham at the Fillmore West and East and others, and kind of annoyed the Allman Brothers. They were jamming with a completely different mindset and purpose. It was very intentional with jazz. And, because they were as good as they were, and I was listening today again, in preparation for this, trying to settle my mind on all kind of things. And I'm listening to one zig and another zag, and you can hear it just between the drums and the bass, between the two drums, on a record. Like they took it to another level. And the thing is, you were mentioning Filmore East, they captured it. Again, looking at sports teams, you can go, your team is super favored to win a big game, and they can go lay an egg, right? That doesn't happen with the Allman Brothers Band when they go to play the big game and record their album. They record 4 sets that are absolutely stellar, and they piece together a brilliant record out of it with 0 overdubs. So they're walking on a tight wire, hitting record, and playing in front of a couple thousand people, zooted out of their minds. By the way, they're not sober. Okay, but they're somehow so good and so in control of what they're doing, right? And you can hear it in the music. It's all intentionality. The way I describe it is, and I put it in the book about my favorite things, the Rodgers and Hammerstein song that Coltrane did. But you have the basis of the song. You have a few markers along the way for where you go. Those are movements in the song, changes or whatnot. And then everything else is up to the guy, in this case, all guys, playing. And then, playing like that is you're feeling your other bandmates. You could have smoke in your eyes because you got a cigarette in your mouth, right? You could be looking at somebody in the audience who's yawning, or audience members who are digging it. All of these things factor into the performance. And for them, it was that live experience. And this is true, by the way, the Grateful Dead in that San Francisco scene. The live experience was a communal experience, very akin to a spiritual church experience. The audience is part of the performance, and that's what also separates like At Fillmore East and some other live records of the time. The other ones had more overdubs. There's zero overdubs on At Fillmore East.
All right. Then we've talked a lot about the original era of the Allman Brothers at the very start. But how would you describe the musical influence of the ABB living on in the world today? What is their legacy?
Allison, this is y'all don't understand what an awesome question this is. Like I'm so proud of my student for doing this one. Um, when I first started getting into this band in the 90s, they were still somewhat a forgotten entity. Even though they had put themselves back together and were thriving, there's still a little bit of a joke. They only started getting back together. Their flame out in the 80s and 70s was very, current. And it used to be like, hey, have you heard the Allman Brothers Band? They were like the secret or something. I haven't run into that in many, many, many years. And partially it's because I am who I am and I run, run with people who know who the Allman Brothers are. But by the same token, musicians name drop them constantly. I'll tell you several that I came across recently that blew me away. Jimmy Chamberlin of the Smashing Pumpkins, who's drummer of the Smashing Pumpkins, and Billy Corgan, who's the leader of the Smashing Pumpkins. Jimmy and I have spoken about this. He has a copy of the book. He's read it, I believe. But he's like, oh my God, they influenced us so much. The Smashing Pumpkins influenced the Allman Brothers. The Allman Brothers Band influenced the Smashing Pumpkins. Early stuff, not the recent stuff. I've heard the same said about from Kirk Hammett of Metallica, which shocks me and then doesn't shock me. And I've seen it referenced with Stephen Perkins and Dave Navarro, both of Jane's Addiction. For me, what's super interesting is those were three bands I was listening to when I came to find the Allman Brothers Band. Like I don't exactly know which came first. I know Jane's was first. I don't know where Pumpkins came in the order of it, but it was all about that same time. So that's like these, let's say one very metal and two very alternative bands. That carries through though from the 90s all the way through today. I mean, you're going to know a whole bunch of the country artists, whether they're chart topping artists, like the bro country thing I can't speak to, but the Chris Stapleton, is as name checked them. And then you get all the blues guys, the blues rock guys like Marcus King, and they're all name dropping the Allman Brothers Band. They're known and I think very well respected. I do think I keep hearing this. It's one thing for fans to say, it's a super common thing to say on social media, like, oh, most underrated ever. I don't know. I mean, I think Duane Allman gets a lot of attention for who he is, even if he's not like somebody who everybody knows immediately. Those who know. As you get further down the list, like with Dickie, who's out of the band for the last 14 years, a little less so. I do my best to bring that forward too. But it's a massive legacy. And when Dickie Betts died earlier this year, like you saw a bunch of people recording or playing his songs. I mean, Marcus and Drew Smithers do a great version of Ramblin' Man now. They did Liz Reed one night. Heck, Reba McEntire and Post Malone did Ramblin' Man, a couple verses. So, you can't get much bigger than CMT with those two, So it's a big legacy.
It's a good one. It's a good musical legacy.
Yes.
All right. So our final question, at least that I have for tonight. For anyone who enjoys the improvisational style of the ABB, or maybe for people who haven't listened to a whole lot of ABB, what would you recommend they listen to or next?
Man. Okay, like the one that I always issue. So I got this little play off the Dr. Dre, the old Dr. Pepper commercials. Trust me, I'm a doctor. So I'm a PhD. I'm not a real doctor. So I issue prescriptions for music as often as I feel like it, sometimes on social media, sometimes for my friends. I will say for current bands, the one I would check out is Tedeschi Trucks Band. And that is a 12-piece ensemble. Derek Trucks was in the Allman Brothers Band for the last 15 years of their existence. from 99 to 2014. His uncle Butch was one of the founding drummers. This is Derek's band with his wife Susan. And they're the band that I spend a lot of time with and around. In fact, I'm headed to see them later this week, actually. I mentioned before Marcus King. Marcus King Band has got to be the hottest rock and roll band going out there right now. And they pay a lot of homage to the Allman Brothers Band and to Southern music in general, the traditions. Both of those bands do. They're family oriented, and that's something I think that the Allman Brothers Band passed down as well, is that sort of idea of this community and family that you're a part of, and adding toward. I'll just say I get a lot of people, old timers, always, saying, they just don't make music like they used to, like best ever and blah. Yeah, I think the Allman Brothers is the greatest thing ever. They broke the mold, but I think it's super unfair to consider anybody that came after them to somehow not be able to even hold a candle to them or whatever else. Perry Farrell said wrote in Classic Girl, they may say those were the days, but anyway, for us, these are the days. These are the days. And that's true about musicians today, too. There's 13, 12-year-old musicians who are picking up guitars for the first time that are going to blow all of us away. Guitars, whatever stinking instruments they got, right? So, to me, I've done against everything, including the first time I said, I turned to my wife and I said, all this shit on the radio sounds the same. Oh, I'm sorry. All this sounds the same? And then I said, oh my God, I sounded like my dad. And that was like 1999, So they're there. The bands are there to be found, and some of them are found on big stages. You guys got beautiful, wonderful Red Rocks out there that hosts a lot of bands that carry on this magic and tradition. I mean, one that does a lot is Widespread Panic, who comes out to your neck of the woods, and those guys are a little older than me, about my age. So, that second generation, that wave of people who grew up listening to this stuff. Y'all, it's Christmas time. People are going to love the book. I know they will. I hear this repeatedly. Buy 2 copies, one to give away. Nobody ever complains about a rock and roll book under the tree. Thank you very much. Allison's shown up to play all night. So, but you can reach me. I'm on all social media at Long Live the ABB, all of them but one channel so far. So you can find me YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, everything else, and then longlivetheabb.com. So I'm writing long form, and really the focus is on the wider story, which is how we learn about people and culture. I call it Conversation from the Crossroads of Southern Music History and Culture, looking at the Allman Brothers Band story, various elements of it, and doing a deep dive to sort of show a little bit of how historians do their work, but also how we reconstruct and interpret the past. And so I have a lot of fun with that. That's the long form on the blog, and then you can reach me all the other social medias. Eventually, we'll put this up in, at least some of this audio. I love to record my audio and do that stuff. So appreciate y'all very much for having me. I saw Harry's comment. Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it very much. My goal was to make sure all the other hardcores love the book as much as I would love it if I got a book like that. And I feel good about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I wasn't a hardcore, and I enjoyed it when you first published it. So mission accomplished.
That was my goal. My goal also, I'll say this for those of y'all who are like, this will be interesting or whatever. I probably more than any other time in my life really thought and spent a lot of time thinking about how writers write and construct their books and everything else, especially as I moved into this phase of it. Like, what did I like about books? What don't I like about books? There are some that I don't, there are some things about my book I would change even at this point, but the way I presented it was me, and that's that big difference between maybe being an academic and always doing something for an academic, and then putting a book out in the open that's in your own voice or whatever else. And I can totally relate to Duane saying, no, we're going to record a live album at Fillmore East. Like, if it's all on the line, I want to do it my way, 100%, I can relate to that. I think a lot of creative people certainly can, or people with driven people certainly can.
Absolutely, yeah.
We had Brandon in the chat asked if you could discuss his collaboration with Eric Clapton.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Brandon Biggie, my long time, one of my best friends from years back. So in 1970, Duane Allman had a very short-lived collaboration with Eric Clapton on Clapton's most famous record, I think, or at least his the one that captured him the most as an artist, Layla, and other assorted love songs. Duane and Clapton met sort of randomly. They met through Clapton's producer and Duane's producer, Tom Dowd. Duane kind of showed up one day. They met at an Allman Brothers concert. Clapton was blown away, said, come back to the studio. They went back to the studio and jammed for hours. And he's like, hey, man, Clapton, why don't you stay? And we'll just record this album together. By all accounts, the sessions in Miami were kind of not going real well. There was a lack of, I guess, creative spark. And when Duane came, it just added the creative spark. The song Layla, those first seven licks, first seven notes of Layla is the vocal line to an Albert King song, the first line called As the Years Go Passing By. So I put this out there all the time. The line is, there is nothing I can do. That's the Layla line that Duane actually writes. So Duane played on most of the record. Eric Clapton offered him a spot in his band, and Duane Allman turned it down. Duane Allman turned it down for probably $5-10 worth of meal money a day. Turned down probably $5,000 a week to play with Eric Clapton, who at the time was the biggest star in the world or among them. Really significant that he said, no, I'm going to stick with my band. And Clapton's band, Derek and the Dominoes, completely fell apart. They recorded a live record that really wasn't the same. And Duane went and 6 months later recorded At Fillmore East. So it ultimately made the right decision. But I just put this on longlivetheabb.com. When Duane met God, because that used to be Clapton as God was spray painted in London. So that was my play on this 23-year-old kid went toe to toe with one of his idols. Eric Clapton was the guitar god of the kind of music that they played, that the Allman Brothers played. Like, just well known for all of it.
Just further incentivizing. Go check out Long Live the ABB.
Longlivetheabb.com. Absolutely. Please do. Please do.
It's a lot of fun over there. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I hope everyone in the audience had as much fun as Bob and I planning and executing this. It was a fabulous time. If you could take a minute to fill out our survey that I popped in the chat, we go